How do you create an edge in trading? Every day as a day trader, we're looking to decipher the candlesticks, decipher what the market is going to do, create an edge. We want to be entering trades, exiting trades based on an overall plan and an edge that we find in the market. The most common question that new day traders ask is, how do you create an edge? How do you go about finding an edge in today's market? We're gonna break that down right here in this video, so make sure you stay tuned.
Yeah.
What's going on, guys? Patrick here. Today, we're talking about how to find an edge, right? People always ask me, like, how do I get an edge? How do I find an edge? Everybody wants to know, how do I find an edge? And like I said at the beginning of the video, every day we're presented with 1,000 different setups, different possibilities. We're looking at these candlesticks. We have indicators. We have all these different things on the chart that are supposed to give us an edge. But at the end of the day, having an edge is not based off of just one indicator or one trade plan. One thing that I have to mention right away, everybody wants the secret to finding an edge, but I think at the end of the day, long term, being in front of the chart, seeing the patterns play out, seeing how the market reacts with different patterns. We have different setups when we're breaking through resistance, when we're breaking down, we're at the VWAP. All these different things are always happening when we're trading. The longer that you're in front of the chart, the more that you're training your brain, you're training your muscles, your muscle memory here to see a pattern and be like, hey, look, I've seen this pattern happen 100 times, and every time that I've seen this, or 90% of the time that I've seen this pattern play out, one thing normally happens, and that the market either goes down or the market goes up. So using today as an example, you can see here, this is the QQQ, which is basically the ETF that follows the NASDAQ over and over. I've talked about here on the channel, the idea of the gap down and then the gap fill. After we fill the gap, we obviously don't know exactly what's going to happen from there, but we know that a lot of times when we have a gap down or a gap up, that gap likes to get filled. So that's the first pattern of the day that we've seen perfectly played out. The second setup, the second pattern that we have going on here as well is we have the idea of the gap fill, but we also have the VWAP right here, right? We have the VWAP right there, and one thing that I've known by trading for the last 5 years now is that when we get the break below the VWAP, we normally will get a continuation lower. And well, where would we continue lower? And our target for that break below the VWAP would either be a support or a overall level that we've bounced off before, and that's exactly what we did. We got that pullback, we broke through the VWAP, and then you can see the next candle right down there to previous area of support. So again, what do we have now? We have the third pattern, which is a double bottom. So we have this bottom, we have this bottom. I have multiple things going on, but we're just identifying patterns. So right away at the open, we had the gap down. That's one pattern we know that normally gets filled. Number two, we pushed up above the VWAP and then we broke below the VWAP, knowing that normally when we break below the VWAP, we would then what? Go lower. We went lower, and then guess what? We found support and we had a double bottom. What normally happens when we have a double bottom? Normally when we get a double bottom, we get a push back up to the previous area of resistance or kind of a pivot, things like that. So we got to push back up to the VWAP here off of that double bottom now, and guess what? We're getting ready for our fourth, or I don't think it's our fifth, our fourth pattern of the day. We played this perfectly during the live stream as well. So this is not me just sitting here and going, drawing lines and looking at the chart in hindsight. This was a pattern that we took a trade on right here on this. Again, following that 3-minute chart breakdown that I've talked about before with the trend, we broke above the VWAP. So we reclaimed the VWAP here. We held the VWAP support. We had this trend right here on the 3-minute chart, and as soon as we broke above, you guys can go and watch the video on YouTube, doing it live. I've noted right here that the high on this candle was 293.26. If we could break above the high of that candle, I would expect a push up to the 294s or the 295 level for the next leg higher, and we broke that down live during the live stream this morning. So just for everybody out there who's like, oh, this guy is just going in hindsight, this is all happening during the live stream. So this is our fifth, our sixth pattern that we've now identified on the day. And again, what normally happens when we reclaim the VWAP, we get the break to the upside here. I would say 90% of the time, we then get the next leg higher and we push up and we filled the gap. So we had the previous morning, the first pattern of the day, the gap fill, that got filled, right? We had the reclaim of the VWAP and then that bounce there, boom. We had that push. I've been talking a lot about the VWAP in my videos, and also the idea of the deviation here. So we have this deviation, these dots on the chart. Again, we push up off the VWAP, we get up here to that previous area of resistance, and guess where we pulled back? We pulled back to those dots being the VWAP standard deviation there. And then guess what? We had another break to the upside, and the same kind of setup that we had earlier that we talked about in multiple videos on my channel, the 3-minute breakout. We had the high on this candle being 294.92. So where do you enter? You enter there for the break above the high of that candle. We get the breakout from that downward trend off of the VWAP. So we have another pattern that we're bouncing off the VWAP, and then we're breaking the trend for the next leg higher. And again, the pattern here is that we've seen this happen over and over, and I would say this is probably like a 90% chance that the market's going to push up from that level, and that's exactly what it did. Ended up pushing up all the way to 296. Again, guess what happens? We pulled back to the VWAP here, that standard deviation. But the thing is, this is a little bit of a different scenario here now, right? Because what we're looking at here, if we get rid of this one, we hit touch there, we touched. Same kind of setup. We did get a break to the upside here, popping off that candle, and we did a little move up. But guess what happens? This is a pattern that you got to identify right away. So we have this little pattern breaking off there. But the bigger trend, the overall trend that we had going, is if we look here, we're going to go and we're going to connect that to bounces. So what do we see now? I don't know if you guys can see it, but again, guess what we have? We have a pattern forming, or we have a pattern on the chart. Obviously, we didn't know exactly how high this was going to go, but once we saw this, what do we got? We have a head and shoulders. So we have this high here. We have the overall high there as that move up, and then the next lower high. This is what was key for the head and shoulders on this setup, is we have this high here being the left shoulder, the head, and then guess what? We had the right shoulder being a lower high. So again, what does this pattern normally mean? How does it normally play out? When this breaks that trend line here, we break the neckline, we would normally get a move to the downside. So again, the pattern, right? This is like our 8th pattern of the day that we're looking for in terms of setups. Now, what's really interesting is, again, we break down and then we pulled back to the VWAP. I would say normally the VWAP is a magnet. The price action likes to kind of move back to the VWAP before bouncing up again, finding support, and that kind of did exactly that. It broke that uptrend, breaking the neckline there, moving down to the VWAP, getting a little bit of a bounce, and then we got stuck below the VWAP. And again, normally this pattern plays out. When we break below the VWAP, we then turn the VWAP into resistance. The market moves down. So this is like the 11th or 12th pattern that we've seen here today. Another pattern here, right? Another pattern. We have the deviation dots down there. And guess what? We got the double bottom. Boom, boom, touching there at that 290-250 level 2 times. So basically, bam. And what normally happens from a double bottom? We get the push up. So we got to push up here. We push up to the VWAP. We touch the VWAP there, a little pullback, and then we break and then reclaim the VWAP. So again, what happens when we reclaim the VWAP? We normally get a move higher. And look how perfectly this played out. So we push above the VWAP. This is what I love to see. We push above the VWAP. We pull back. We then turn the VWAP into support on that candle. And look, we push up. 12 or 13, 14 different patterns that we had play out today. And kind of the same idea into close. Normally when we can't push above that previous high, we would either kind of go sideways or pull back there. We did get a little bit of pullback. But in general, there was multiple setups. You had the overall gap fill, you had the VWAP reclaim, you had the neckline on the head and shoulders, you had the breakdown, you had another double bottom, and then the push up, and then the reclaim of the VWAP there at that level 294 and pushing up again. So patterns playing out. These patterns played out in every pattern that we saw here, we were able to identify. The thing is, here's the secret, right? Are you ready for the secret? A lot of people, when they're trading, they try to force the trade. They try to jump in before the move happens, maybe trying to buy the dip before the dip has all the way happened, or they try to jump in for the breakout without seeing that pullback to the VWAP, things like that. All of these patterns that I identified obviously happened at a certain point in time, but until those patterns played out, so I was like, okay, when that neckline broke, that's when I know I can go short, right? I know I can go short when that neckline breaks because we have the idea, percentages of how many times the neckline breaks on that head and shoulders. We had the idea that when the VWAP got reclaimed, once it was reclaimed, right, we got the break above the VWAP, we pulled back to the VWAP, we turned that into support, and then we pushed up, and then that's our entry. So we're looking for these setups, and we're looking for these setups to play out, and then once they play out, that's when we're looking to enter a trade based off knowing that in the past we've seen these setups like the gap fill, like the VWAP bounce, those things like that. We've seen this happen over and over, and we know that statistically creating an edge here that we're going to have a better chance of being correct with our trade. Remember, it's day trading, not profiting. So every trade you go into, there's a chance that you might end up getting stopped out. There's a chance that you might lose money based on the overall odds, but we're looking to create an edge and understanding that having all these different indicators and having all these different ideas of where to buy and sell, that's totally fine. But you need to be able to identify the pattern. You need to be able to identify what's going on in the bigger picture. Are we pushing above the VWAP? Are we bullish? Is the overall trend on the day bullish? Are we going higher? Are we going choppy? Is the market slow? What is going on? You need to be able to identify those. And again, that gap fill, really like seeing that, knowing that normally we get those gap fills. Well, I'm like, okay, I can stay long because I believe the market's going to fill that gap. And that's exactly what it did today. So at the end of the day, creating an edge really comes down to having as much time as possible, training your eyes, training your brain to identify these patterns, and then know that when these patterns play out, what do you do? When the neckline breaks on the head and shoulders, do I get long or do I get short? And then knowing to get long when we reclaim the VWAP and we bounce off the VWAP for a second time, that's, again, knowing that I should be getting long when that pattern plays out.